genocide. Now we move on to our next news. There are massive protests in London, Chile, and Tel Aviv in support of Gaza. People in London are protesting the country's decision to ban the Palestine Action Group. As a result, the London police have detained more than 466 people who were protesting. Hundreds of people gathered at Parliament Square in London denouncing Israel's war on Gaza. Meanwhile, demonstrators are marching in Chile in a rally called Empty Pots, which is a pro-Palestine rally. The people are marching through Santiago against Gaza's hunger crisis. People were seen carrying Palestinian flags, banners saying "Stop the genocide" and "Chile do not remain silent." There are also hundreds of people who have taken to the streets in Tel Aviv against the escalation of war in Gaza after what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the complete takeover of Gaza entirely. The protesters are demanding the release of hostages and an end to the war. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Gilad Hirschberger. He's a political psychologist at Reichman University. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at these protests, thank you. Now looking at these protests, where does can there be any border between freedom of speech and commenting or condemning and calls for these kind of issues that are highly sensitive?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think we need to understand the nature of these protests and where they are completely legitimate and where perhaps they are somewhat problematic. So, of course, freedom of speech is important, and it's completely legitimate to protest the actions and policies of the Israeli government. But what we need to also understand is that these protests are not spontaneous. They are orchestrated by several powerful actors, Qatar being the first and most important culprit of who is organizing these protests. And part of the reason that Qatar is so invested in these protests is in order to smear the name of Israel, not just Israeli policies, not just the current government, but Israel as a whole. And this is why we're seeing many of the protests and the level of organization that we see today.
Professor, when you say Qatar is organizing these, where is this claim coming from? Do you have any sources?
Yes, actually, I am part of a research group that's called T-Politography. And what we do is we monitor over 12,000 different indicators pertaining to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we have several different experts on different topics working with us. And one of the experts is an expert on Qatar, and she monitors the speeches, the statements, the influencers that Qatar is sending out into the world to advance their agenda. And it's very clear when you look at the data coming out of Qatar that Qatar has an agenda when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that it's using its money and influence not as a fair broker in negotiations between Israel and Hamas, as many people think, but actually to advance its goal to turn Israel into a pariah state. So this is the important distinction between legitimate protests that I completely support, but we also have to keep in mind the powers behind the scene.
And Professor, when now that you have mentioned Qatar, I would like to build up on that. What is Qatar's motive? Why is Qatar trying or is influencing these kind of protests abroad against Israel?
Well, it's important to understand that there are several different axes of force in the Middle East. We have, for example, Iran as the leader of the Shiite axis, and Qatar and Turkey as well are leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the Sunni axis, and it's an extreme axis. It's different than the moderate Sunni countries such as the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan. The more extreme Sunni axis would like to see, first of all, Israel obliterated, and would also like to see its influence increase around the world. And Qatar is definitely using its money and influence from sending billions and billions of dollars to U.S. universities. One should ask, why is a small country in the Middle East investing so much money in higher education in the United States? And the answer is because they are buying influence. And they're buying influence because they have an agenda. And part of their agenda is Israel. It's not their only agenda.
Thank you very much, Professor Gilad Hirschberg,